We need His peace. And fortunate for us, He provides a peace that's beyond description, beyond our understanding. And He's promised, in fact, to guard our hearts and minds with that peace when we allow Him to do so. How often do you think about success? It's kind of a recurring theme around here. I know from time to time I bring up this issue of success because I want us to be successful people. I want you to be successful in your life. I want you to be successful in your relationships, in your family and marriage relationships. And again, let me put a plug in for tonight in our study of the family project. But do you think about successful people? Sometimes we make the mistake, I believe, of thinking that success or successful people are those who, have been born with a silver spoon in their mouths or have had life offered to them on a silver platter. But that's not really success. Success is measurable. We often determine success, at least maybe on a personal level, by the size of someone's home or the amount that's in a bank account. Those are things that we think of as successful people. In sports, we measure success in terms of wins and losses. And I'm not going to go there today. In business, success is determined by quarterly financial reports. Did we make money? In education, success is measured by graduation rates or standardized test scores. See, there has to be some standard against which we measure success. Whether that's for an individual or an entity, something has to be measured to determine success. How do you think God determines success? What if I told you that God's measurement for determining success really doesn't have to do with the things that I've mentioned so far? How then does God measure success? What is His standard for success? Well, there's a one-word answer for that, and that one word is Jesus. But since you're not Jesus and I'm not either, we've got a problem. If that's the standard, we're in trouble. So let's look at God's measuring stick for success, maybe from a different perspective or a different angle. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 13, Scripture should be on the screen for you. The Apostle Paul writes, "Till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ." This is God's measuring stick for success. He uses the word here, perfect man. So perfection then is the definition of success, and it's measured by the standard of the fullness of all that we find in Jesus Christ. Maybe this isn't helping, because we said it's Jesus, and now we're saying it's perfection, and you're not perfect. I can tell you that much. And you could say the same thing to me, because we know each other, and none of us are perfect. But there is hope, I promise. This word perfect appears in the text that we're going to kind of dive into in just a moment. It appears in our text here this morning, and we need to take a closer look at what it means. Today we begin a new sermon series, and we're going to work our way through the New Testament book of James. And the title of this series is printed on your outline. It's on the projection screen there before you. And what you see is at the very heart of the book of James. Because what we wanted and what James wants for us and what James describes is what the successful believer looks like. And we're going to be pursuing over the coming weeks a journey of growing in spiritual maturity, producing the fruit of good works from the roots of deep faith. We're going to be producing good fruits from the roots of deep faith. So let's dive into our text this morning, James chapter 1, verse 1 and following. James writes and gives his name as the one who is writing this letter. James, a bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greetings. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Some translations use the word temptation there. That's not a good translation of the word in the text here. It should be trials, because we're not tempted by God. And James goes on to say that later on. God does not tempt us to do anything. Satan tempts, God tests through trials. So a better translation of that word is to say, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Did you notice that word perfect again in our text? Twice in verse 4, James uses that word to describe the believer who's acquired a much-needed virtue of patience. That word translated as perfect in the English here is the Greek word teleos. And that word teleos in the Greek has to do with something being completed, a finished product. Now, when you apply it to people, you can also translate that word as mature, having grown up, become an adult. So you have a child would be immature, would not be teleos. But an adult would be teleos. You would have grown up and matured. Now, some of us are grown up and not very mature. So, but the idea there is, in the physical sense, we have a maturity. But in the spiritual sense, God is looking for maturity in believers. He's looking for maturity in us. And so, what we find here is in spiritual maturity is a process for sure. But you know, there ought to be some measurables. There has to be a measure of levels of achievement in this growing process that indicate that we're moving in the right direction. So if we're growing up in our faith, if we're walking with God, there are measurables for that. So are we being successful? Maybe we haven't reached where we want to be yet, but are we moving in a successful direction in the Christian life? Are we growing in spiritual maturity? Are we producing good fruit for the Lord because we've grown deep roots in Him and in our faith? So, do we look more like the finished product than we ever have before? Now, what is the finished product? Well, Jesus, also known as perfection, either way we look at it, Scripture says our goal is to be Christ-like, to have this mind in you which was also in Christ Jesus, according to Philippians chapter 2. So that's the goal. And what James is going to do is help point us in the right direction. What are the measurables? How do we get there? What does it look like when we're moving in the right direction? So let's look at some measurables this morning. There are three things real quickly in just the first 4 verses of the book of James that we'll consider today that are some of the measurables that help us determine whether or not we're moving toward maturity, spiritual maturity in our Christian life. And the first of those was mentioned in verse 2. And we'll simply put it this way: mature believers see trouble as an opportunity for joy. Mature believers see trouble as an opportunity for joy. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't get real excited about trouble. I don't know of many people who do. There are some, masochists out there that just say, just bring it on. I don't particularly like or want to go through troubling times, trials, tribulations. And again, listen, these words, testing, trials, tribulations, are interchangeable. I do not like to use the word, we mentioned earlier, temptation, because that's not what we're talking about at this point. Temptation is towards sin. A testing is toward godliness. And there'll always be a differentiation there. So I wished that the writers of the King James, or the translators in the King James, had not used the word temptation there, because the better word is a trial or a testing of your faith. But no one gets excited about trouble, but that doesn't mean it's not always very far away. Have you ever thought that life could be measured or could be described as a journey from one difficult situation to the next? That's just kind of how life goes for us quite often. I wonder if there's a reason for that. And yeah, we'd have to say yes. According to Scripture, there's reason why we go from one troubling situation to another. There's good reason for that. It simply means God's at work in our lives. Now, if you want the easy road, and we kind of all would like to have that, but on the easy road, is God really doing anything to work and change and mold and make us the way that we need to be? The way He wants us to be? He shapes us and He forms us through these troubles. In James 1 and verse 2, we read a moment ago, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials." In spiritual terms, what God is doing when God's at work in our lives, that God is allowing us to be refined by the fires of trouble so that we'll come out shining like pure gold. So in spiritual terms, what does pure gold look like? It looks like joy. The shine of pure gold, that shimmer that comes off when sunlight hits gold, and there's just that shimmer, that brilliance. In the Christian life, the brilliance that's reflected in our lives, the Bible calls it joy. It's an attitude of the heart that's found a peace and a contentment in life. And it doesn't waver in that, despite the circumstances. That's why Paul in Ephesians, the verse after the verses that I read just a moment ago, when I quoted about Paul's words about being perfect and mature until we measure to the stature of the fullness of Christ, the very next verse there, verses 14 and 15, say that we should no longer be children. There's that maturity process. Because children are what? They're tossed to and fro and carried about all over the place. There's no, they're not solid. Because when we're more like children, we're tossed to and fro and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men and cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. But that means we don't want to be that way. We need to be different than that. But speaking the truth in love, what do? Grow up, that you may grow up in all things into Him who is the head, that is Christ. So again, there's the goal, the Lord Jesus. And we're on a maturing process to look more like Him, to think more like Him. Doesn't mean we put on sandals and walk around, in the dress of the first century. It means we want to look like Him on the inside until it just pours out on the outside. So joy. Joy is the ability. What is joy? Joy is the ability to see it from God's perspective. Jesus never was fearful. He was never worried. Jesus never reacted. He was always calm in the moments of trouble. He was poised under pressure. He was loving even toward His enemies as they came to arrest Him and to kill Him. Do you remember how when they were coming to arrest Jesus in the garden back in Luke chapter 22, verses 50 and 51, we read in, and one of them, that was the disciples that were gathered around in the garden praying with Jesus, that woke up. Jesus told them, stay over here and pray, and I'm going to go over here and pray. And He came back and found them asleep. But when they woke up and they saw that they were coming to arrest Jesus, one of them pulled the sword, or the dagger, the knife, and Scripture says that one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus, verse 51, but Jesus answered and said, permit even this. And He touched his ear and healed him. See, there was joy about Jesus that allowed Him to control his emotions and remain faithful to the Father's will for his life. So James says that when trouble comes, consider it an opportunity to exercise real Christ-likeness in your life. Be joyful. This is a sign of genuine Christian maturity. Children are known to throw tantrums, when things don't go their way, but we're called to grow up in Christ, to be mature and faithful witnesses and followers of Jesus Christ. So, measurable number one, mature believers see trouble as an opportunity for joy. But let's look at a second measurable. How do we know if we're headed down the path successfully in the Christian life? A second measurable is this. Mature believers view testing as an opportunity for growth. Mature believers view testing as an opportunity for growth. You see, trouble and testing are God's instruments that measure our success in spiritual maturity. Verse 3 of our text today, James 1:3 says, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Notice the word produces. There's a growth process. When we go to the store to get vegetables, that is what we call the produce section. Something has started in the dirt and grown some fruit or vegetation that now is the product. Look at this from, I like how the New Living Translations, the translators put this verse in the translation there, it should be on the screen for you. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. That's what that word produce means. It's a product of growth. Something is growing, it's maturing in our lives. Success in the Christian life is measurable by the product that's being produced in your life. Patience, or sometimes as it's translated, endurance, is the product that will characterize your life if you can view life from God's perspective. When your attitude toward trouble and testing consists of joy, the natural byproduct of that is going to be patience. Because a joyful person is also a patient person. An impatient person is not reflecting the character of Jesus in his or her life. How do we know that that's a characteristic of God? Because God is patient and desires that we exemplify his character before the world. Look at this verse. Romans 15 and verse 5 says, now may the God of what? Patience and comfort grant you to be like-minded toward one another according to Christ Jesus. So God is the God of comfort, but God is the God of patience. And he's calling us to be like-minded, be patient with each other. Help one another. So joy is a mark, a measurable of spiritual maturity, and patience is also a mark or a measurable of spiritual maturity. But there's something else that we need to know. The third measurable I want to mention this morning is this. Mature believers know that trials are obstacles through which they become strong in character and ready for anything. Okay? Trials have a purpose in our lives that we'll become strong in character and ready for anything. Again, James chapter 1 and verse 4, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Now, the New Living Translation gives a meaning behind these words and translates this verse in this way. So let it grow. What is that? Well, it's referring to the previous verse, that patience that we need to have. And let that grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, mature, that's that word for perfection, then you'll be strong in character and ready for anything. That's just good stuff. If we'll let God do his work in us through the testing and the trials, and we'll learn to be patient through those things, and let God build his character in us, we will be ready for whatever life throws our way. And that's God's goal for us. That is success in the Christian life. Doesn't that sound like success to you? I want to show you a short video clip that illustrates what God's doing in your life.
So the first bowl I ever made was about 10 years ago, and it was somewhat of a disaster. Since then, I've created hundreds of pieces, and with all the time I spent, I've had long hours with nothing but my tools and the lumber and my thoughts. It's kind of inevitable that with these long, quiet hours, my mind starts to wander, and I end up finding like a deeper meaning in my work. I like to see the wood in its raw and its natural state, just rough and without purpose. And it kind of reminds me in a lot of ways of myself like 12 years ago before I met Jesus. I was an addict. I was a victim of my own bad choices. I was spiritually dead and hollow. It was a lot like this wood that I'm carving. So the gathering process is one of my favorite parts. Each piece is really different. Each one has its own imperfections and its own unique characteristics. It's actually the knots and the cracks that make the transformation and the end product worth all the effort. It's really a hard and violent process for a piece to turn from its natural state and become something useful and beautiful. Having gone through repentance myself and turning from my own sin and guilt and allowing Christ to wipe away my sins and remove the blood from my hands, I really understand the before and after that's the gospel. I see the same before and after process with my craft. It really begins as a useless, dead piece of wood, and then it goes through this sudden transformational process. The carving and the smoothing transforms the piece into something new altogether. It's at really this point that one can see a beautiful and useful piece of work has taken shape from something that was broken and dead to begin with. I think that that's something really beautiful.
You see, God's in the business of taking something that's not really perfect yet and molding it and making you into something beautiful, something useful, something meaningful. That's God's maturing work in our lives, and He uses the trials and tribulations of life. God's working and wants to work in your life to bring you to a place where you enjoy life, where there's true joy even in the midst of trouble. Growing in patience and godly virtue through the testing of your faith. That's God's goal for you. He's at work in trials that you think are painful because He's building a masterpiece. A masterpiece of success. It's strong in character and ready for anything. So here's the question. Will you let Him do His work? You can resist, and you can let trials and tribulations in life cause you to want to walk away. But you'll miss the greatest blessing, the maturing process of what it means to find real joy in life, patience in character, strength in character, ready for anything. Will you bow your head for a moment? In just a moment, we're going to have a hymn of invitation, and that simply means you're invited to come. You're invited to respond. God wants to do this great work in your life, but are you ready to respond to Him? Are you ready to say yes to Jesus? Do you know for certain that He's Lord and Savior of your life? Has there ever been a time in your life where you know for absolute certainty that you repented of your sin? You turned to Jesus and you said, Jesus, I'm a sinner. I need a Savior. Will you save me from my sin? Will you come into my heart? Will you forgive my sin? Will you make me something new? like your word says. Have you ever done that? If you've never come to Jesus that way, then you've never come to Him for salvation, because that's the way of salvation. Repentance, forgiveness of sin, and new life. Maybe you just need to do business with God today. And you need to say, Lord, I want to grow and mature in my Christian walk. I can see where there's so many places that I've just never really grown. And if the truth be told, I'm more like a spiritual babe than a spiritual grown-up. Would you just be honest with God and say, Lord, that's who I am now, but that's not who I want to be. Help me, Father, to grow, to mature, so that I can experience the joy and the patience and the strength of character and the readiness for anything life may throw my way, because I have a solid foundation built upon the truths of your word and faith in Christ. If that's you today, maybe you just need to spend time with the Lord in prayer. Maybe you'd like for someone to pray with you. Would you come? Would you come and rededicate your life to Him? Fathers, we've examined these great truths of your word today about spiritual maturity. Our prayer is that we would grow in you into the fullness of the stature of the Lord Jesus Christ Himself. His character, His mind in us, so that others would see you and want to find peace, the kind of peace we have in our lives, the kind of joy that comes from you alone.